lately, I've been thinking a lot about all of the politics in the country right now and what it really means to be free, right? You hear that word a lot in the news today. Free, right? What it means to be free or freedom here in America. And the older I get, the more I realize that freedom is directly tied to responsibility. And I know that's counterculture, but it really is. And the more I look around, the more I see that people avoid responsibility like the plague. They want nothing to do with it. And what they don't realize is that the more responsibility you give away, the more freedom you give away. They're connected. The more you want to divorce yourself from responsibility and pass it along to someone else, the less freedom you have. Right? This is why if you don't take responsibility for, I don't know, let's say your retirement, and you give that responsibility to someone else or another organization, you're giving away that freedom. If they decide, oh, you're not getting your retirement, then guess what? You're not getting your retirement. You gave away the responsibility and the freedom. They own you, right? This is why entrepreneurs that are self-employed, for example, they have more freedom, right? They're self-employed. They're their own boss. But they also have more responsibility. They go together, right? People who are employed, and there's nothing wrong with that, they give away a lot of the responsibilities to their boss, to the owners, right? But they have less freedom. Freedom and responsibility go hand in hand, right? Think of a child, for example. Think of a child. Children have no responsibility. And it's because they have no responsibilities that you can't give them full freedom. They're not responsible enough to have full freedom, right? They can't just roam free and do whatever it is that they want, right? If you look at a child, you see a lot of people that they strap their kids on to the chair when they're feeding them so they don't fall off. Or I've seen people put leashes on kids, right? When they're walking on the street, they put leashes on them because they can't roam free, right? And I'm not condoning or condemning these people, but you see it. You see when you put a child in a crib, for example, that crib has bars. It's like a prison, so the child can't get out, right? They're not afforded trust because they're not responsible. A child cannot be free to do as they please. There's limited freedom with the authority of the parents, right? The parents' authority is the safety net that a child needs in order for the child to grow into a responsible state of being where they can actually be free. But without that responsibility, you cannot be free. The child needs a stabilizing force, right? They're not granted freedom immediately. It's a disaster if you give them full freedom. You give a child full freedom, it's a disaster, right? It'll usually lead to self-harm because no one gets it right the first time. The child has the right to make mistakes and learn from them, just like everybody else, right? No one gets it right the first time. So you need healthy boundaries, right, to prevent the child from self-destructing, because that's what happens when the child is given full freedom, right? And a lot of people confuse healthy boundaries with security, right? You're supposed to keep the child safe, right? Why do people give away their freedom, right? Boundaries and security. People want a safety net, right? But what people don't realize is that people with the least amount of freedom are locked up in maximum security prisons. There's a difference, right? Safety and security is not the same thing as healthy boundaries. People get that confused, right? There's a difference between freedom from and freedom to, right? A child, for example, should have freedom from dangerous atrocities from happening to them, right? An adult has freedom to, right? To do as they please with the responsibility that they've earned. Freedom from and freedom to. Freedom from prison is freedom to walk the streets. There's a spectrum, right? There's a spectrum of freedom. It's not black or white, right? It's gray. There's a middle ground. It's a delicate balance between having the responsibility and having the freedom to actually be productive and competent with it. Otherwise, it leads to anarchy, right? It's healthy boundaries. Now, true freedom is healthy boundaries. True freedom is boundaries. And I know people are going to disagree with me because it's so counterculture, but true freedom encompasses boundaries. And I know people say, well, how does that doesn't make sense. How can you be free if you're bound? How do boundaries make you free? But you have to really think about this and understand the psychology behind it to really appreciate it. Okay? In order to be free, you have to have a choice. You have to have a choice in order to be free. It's a basic fundamental principle of freedom. You need to have choice. You need to be able to make a decision for yourself. The decisions cannot be made for you. You need to have a choice, right? If you don't have a choice, you're pretty much a slave. That's what a slave is. A slave is somebody who doesn't have a choice. A slave is somebody who not only doesn't have a choice, but isn't in control. If the slave was in control, then they could easily stop being a slave, right? When you're not in control and when you don't have a choice, you're a slave. Okay? So you have to understand what causes somebody to lose control, right? When you lose control, you also lose choice, right? They go hand in hand. What causes a loss of control? A loss of control comes from chaos. It comes from a paradigm where there's no structure, where it's anarchy, where it's the wild, wild west, right? You could do whatever you want, right? You could do whatever you want, no boundaries. Go for it, right? Do whatever you want. It's a disaster. It's mayhem, okay? You think about this. Let's reverse engineer this, okay? It's a domino effect. When you have mayhem, when you have anarchy, when you have disorder, you automatically lose control. You're not in control. And when you're not in control, you don't have a choice, right? You're in a psychological straitjacket. You don't have a choice. And when you don't have a choice, you don't have freedom. Do you see how that works? Think about it from a reverse engineering point of view. Anarchy, mayhem, no boundaries, no structure, leads to a lack of control. Leads to no choice, which leads to no freedom, right? Imagine going out on the road, right? Going out in traffic and there's no rules, right? There's no red, green lights. There's no stop signs. You can just drive on the road and do whatever you want, right? Full freedom, right? Is that really freedom? Or are you being oppressed? You're being oppressed when there's no rules, when it's a free-for-all. If I wanted to travel from one state to the other, knowing that there's no rules on the road, right? That you don't have to drive on the right side or the left-hand side or whatever country you're living in, whether you drive on the right or the left, there's structure. If you get rid of these rules, there's no way you're going to be able to make traveling safely, right? Safety and security. That's what I'm talking about. People confuse boundaries with safety and security, right? You need structure. You need structure. You need order. I'm reminded of the Titanic, right? The boat, right? The ship that sank. These people that were in the Titanic, they didn't have a choice. There was no freedom in that. There was no freedom in their death. There was no choice. They just had to sit there and wait for the ship to sink. They were not in control. It was just mayhem, right? You need structure, right? You cannot just do whatever you want. You need rules, boundaries, where you mandate somebody to keep their eyes on the ship, right? So they don't crash into an iceberg, right? The whole thing could have been prevented with structure, guidelines, right? You can't just do whatever you want. Freedom comes with responsibility. And with healthy boundaries, when you get rid of these boundaries, you get rid of freedom, right? I think it was Jocko, right? Military man. He said, discipline is freedom. Let me say that again. Discipline is freedom, right? There's an element of control in freedom. Discipline means you're in control, that you do things whether or not you feel like doing them or not. It just needs to be done, and you have the choice to do it or the choice not to do it. And you're in control. That's what discipline means. Having choice and control. They're ingredients in freedom. But like I said, people want to avoid responsibility like the plague. They want the freedom, but not the responsibility that comes along with it. Just like children, right? Choice has to be there. Choice has to voluntarily be there, okay? A lot of the people feel like if they choose to do something, that's freedom. But you have to have a choice to do that, okay? Nowadays, you're not really forced into doing something that's wrong. Now you're seduced into doing something that's wrong. You're a product of gimmicks and novelty, right? There's a promise of salvation, and you get tricked into following the masses, where they don't really give you a choice. You think you have a choice, but it's an illusion, right? You're given the illusion of choice. So you're not forced into doing what's wrong. You volunteer for it. You're brainwashed, right? That is not freedom. Volunteering for something is not freedom. Having the choice is freedom, right? A lot of people are under this belief that they have a choice because they're volunteering for things, and they don't realize that they're being brainwashed in the process. Clarity is understanding that with every freedom comes responsibility, and that they're inseparable. At the end of the day, it is what it is. It's going to be what it's going to be. And that's life.